I have a privilege of being here with you this morning, and I want to try and talk about this passage. And hopefully, as we talk about this passage, kind of explore this idea of insiders and outsiders and what that means for you and how it can impact you. So I lived for the first few years of my life, probably till I was about 8 years old. I lived with my grandparents. My mom was a single mom, and so we lived with my grandparents for a period. And while we were with my grandparents were very traditional. So, 6 o'clock every night, you had to be at the table. If you were there at 6:01, you were late. But 6 o'clock, you had to be at the table because dinner was being served. And every night we would eat dinner around the table. The TV was off. And that's how we kind of did it. And then as we started growing up, my mom got remarried, and then there were new kind of like family traditions, I guess, or family ways of doing things. And we started eating food in front of the TV. And now, no judgment to anyone who does that. This is just my story. But we would sit, and then there was a thing back in the day, so I'm revealing my age, called Mnet Open Time, if anyone remembers what that was. Yeah, if you do not remember it, you are missing out, because that was a treat. The Simpsons. Am I allowed to say that in church? I don't know, but... Anyway, so we'd watch that, and sometimes we'd eat a bit late, so then we'd have to move over to SABC 3, I think it was, that would have Touched by an Angel and Early Edition and Murder, She Wrote and all those things. Wow. All you who have laughed have given away your age, I'm just saying. But then I got to a point while I was finishing school and just going into varsity that I gave my life to Jesus, and Jesus radically touched my heart. And as Jesus impacted my life, it started to shape how I lived. It started to shape my value system. It started to shape what I thought about things. And a fire started burning in my heart. And just at that time, you may remember, was the time that Big Brother came out. And so the first season of Big Brother came out, and sometimes we would be eating at table, and then it would transition into what they called shower hour, which, well, it wasn't explicit, but it was implied explicit, this time. And we would still eat, around the TV, and I decided that I couldn't do this. So I went and I moved myself into the dining room. We kind of had a dining room. It was kind of part of the lounge, but a table there. And I sat at the table with my back opposed to the TV, and I could still hear everything because, we didn't have noise-canceling headphones back then. But it was my little protest in some ways to my family, which in hindsight, maybe it lacked a little bit of wisdom at points, but it was my little protest of saying, hey, I think my faith has so transformed me that I don't really want to be a part of this. I had been brought up in what I would call a broadly Christian home. We would, for the most part, go to church. We would do, for the most part, all the Christian things, celebrate Easter, Christmas, go to church whenever it was convenient, etc., etc. But for the first time, I found myself an outsider in my own family. I found myself as an outsider in a place that I really should belong. I started getting comments from my own family that would say things like, Jamie, what are you doing? This is silly. This is stupid what you're doing. Jamie, do you think you're better than us? And all of these comments would start to come, making me realize more and more that in a place that was meant to be my home, a place where I was meant to be an insider, a place where I was meant to belong, I started finding myself feeling more and more like someone who was out, like someone that didn't belong. See, insiders are those who are part of a particular circle or group or community who are seen to be part of that circle and are accepted. Insiders share the same values, the same culture, the same expectations. They feel a sense of belonging, acceptance, and often power or influence within that group. In Jesus' day, the religious leaders, and as we'll see in this story, his own family, were the insiders. The outsiders are those who are outside of that group or circle, who are excluded for some reason. They may be excluded, they are the marginalized, the excluded, the misunderstood, or simply those who don't conform to the group's norms. Jesus had a habit of finding himself with the outsiders. The lepers, the demon-possessed, the Samaritans, the people that were often labeled as outsiders by society were the followers of Jesus. What I hope this morning is this. I hope for two groups of people that this will impact you. Is for one, if you feel yourself an outsider in some way, if you feel like you've been marginalized in your family or community, if you feel like you've been marginalized because of your faith in some way, I hope that this morning will deeply impact you. Or maybe you're an outsider just because you're a bit different, maybe a little bit quirky, maybe you just think differently to everyone else and you've wondered what Jesus thinks of you. I hope that this morning you'll feel this call to draw you in. And the second group of people is I hope for all of those who struggle with the dynamic of labeling people inside or outside. For those of us who have this danger of putting people in boxes, I hope that this morning this message will challenge you and challenge how you think about people and who Jesus cares about. And this is what I want to leave you with this morning. I want to leave you with this, that it is better to be an outsider who is in. It's better to be an outsider who is in than an insider who is out. And I'll try and make sense of that as we go on. A little while ago, we at Harbour City changed the vision of our church. The vision of our church was to know Jesus and to make him known, which is a really good vision. And so you may wonder why we changed it, but we wanted to slightly adjust it to change the emphasis a little bit. So we changed the vision of Harbour City and we said the vision of Harbour City is this: Jesus full stop. Jesus full stop. To know him, become like him, and make him known. We wanted to be obsessed with Jesus. We wanted him to be our vision, the one that we look at, and as we behold, we become like, and we wanted to be consumed with the person of Jesus. And so we started a series on Mark, which we took a long time going through Mark, looking at every passage. And it was a deeply transformative series for me personally, and hopefully for our church. But we looked at the book of Mark. We went through it story by story, slowly going through the book. And the big idea of the book is this: that there's one thing that Mark wants to leave you with. He wants to leave you with this: that Jesus is a big deal. Jesus is a big deal. That he's really important, and that you and I should take him seriously. And we get to this passage, which is a complicated passage. I don't know if you noticed that while we were reading it. It's very complicated. Jesus says, "Who is my family?" You're like, offensive. It's complicated because it has the age-old question that every charismatic seems to struggle with. No reformed person struggles with this question, but for some reason, we who have come from a more charismatic tradition struggle with this, which is, what is the unforgivable sin? Some of you think you've committed it every day. But I'm not going to really cover on that. I'll make a short note on it at the end. But it's a wild passage about strong men and family, and about Jesus essentially telling us who is inside and who is out. And that's where I want to land. And this passage is what we call in theological terms, it's called a Markan sandwich. It's a Markan sandwich, and which is basically this. It should come up behind me, but a Markan sandwich goes like this. It starts with story A, And then halfway through story A, it interjects with a new story, and then it ends with story B. Now, probably the most famous Mark and sandwich we know of is Jairus' daughter. I don't know if you remember the story, but Jairus' daughter, the story goes like this. Jairus comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, my daughter's really sick. Won't you come and heal her? And then what happens? Jesus is going on his way, and then the woman with the issue of blood makes her way through the crowd, touches Jesus. Jesus stops, gives his attention to the woman with the issue of blood. In the meantime, what happens? Jairus' daughter passes away. But then it comes back to Jairus' daughter, and we know she gets radically healed. But the story is told in such a way that the one story gives emphasis to the other. So what happens is Jairus comes, and it's about faith. Jairus, will you have faith? And then this lady shows incredible faith, and Jesus praises her faith. And as he praises her faith, the challenge to Jairus in the midst of great difficulty is, will he have faith? That's essentially what's being asked. And we know how the story goes. He shows himself to have faith, and his daughter is made well. But this is a Mark and sandwich in the same way. It's a story of family. Jesus' family coming to him, and then it's a parable. And it's an interesting parable because it's the only gospel in which this parable is told first. Normally the parable of the sower is told first. In Mark's gospel, he switches it up and he tells this parable first, which is a really, really weird parable to start with. He tells the parable of the strong man. And then all of a sudden, after this is done, we go back to Jesus' family. And this is done intentionally. It's done intentionally. Mark has a number of these Mark and sandwiches because he wants something of the strong man to tell us something about his comments on his family. And which is what we're going to try and get to. Is that okay? I'm sorry, we're doing a little bit of heavy lifting now. Hopefully, we can just do a tiny bit more heavy lifting, and then we'll get to some good stuff, if that's okay. The heavy lifting is the good stuff, by the way. But so Jesus finds himself in this position where his movement is growing. His movement is growing so much that one of the translations says, a couple of the translations, not one, says that Jesus goes home. He doesn't just go to a home, he goes to his own home. And he's probably going to his own home to eat, as we get from the story. But he's going to his own home to be refreshed, to eat, to take a break. But what happens? This crowd, this movement of Jesus is growing so much that they follow him to his own home. They invade his own home. They are there, eager, waiting to receive from Jesus. The crowd is essentially saying, Jesus, we need you, we want more of you. His family, on the other hand, are concerned about all this growth. We don't know why they're concerned. They may just be concerned for his health. Jesus, you're going to burn out. Maybe a comment that they may have. They may be concerned for their reputation. Jesus, look who you've invited into our home. This is a whole bunch of disreputable guests. This is like impacting our kind of standing in society. We don't know exactly why they are concerned, but you can kind of get an idea. But what we see in this passage is something really odd. For the first time, we see Jesus' family united with the religious leaders, trying to take control of Jesus, trying to bring him in line. Jesus' family and the religious leaders, two groups who are normally at odds with each other, are now uniting to try and exercise their power or their authority or their control over Jesus. Jesus' family's accusations are this: Jesus, you are out of your mind. I mean, can you imagine? Imagine saying that to Jesus. We have hindsight, so it's a little bit easier to look at this and think, yeah, that was a really dumb statement. Like that, you're going to live to regret that one, you know. But Jesus' family are saying, Jesus, are you out of your mind? You've gone crazy. You've lost it. You've lost the plot, Jesus. You're not even able to eat. You've come home. You can't rest. You can't do any of these things. You brought in all these guests into our home who are probably disreputable, and our standing in society is going down. They are bringing an accusation in one sense against Jesus. Jesus, you are crazy. Like, we tolerated your ministry. It was great. We enjoyed the free food. We enjoyed, the healing stuff. But now this, you've gone too far, Jesus. They're trying to use their control, their family responsibility, their role in family to control Jesus. The religious leaders also accuse Jesus, but they do it in a different way. They're going to accuse Jesus by trying to discredit him. They know something's going on. They know that Jesus is doing these incredible things. They're not trying to say that Jesus is lying about it. They know it. They know incredible things are happening. But what are they going to do? How are they going to try and discredit Jesus? They essentially tell Jesus that you are a liar. You are a liar, Jesus. You are not from God. You are not who you say you are. You are doing these miracles. You are exercising this power. You are doing all of these things not from God, but from Beelzebub, the chief of the demons. You are of the devil. They too are united in trying to control Jesus. They are the insiders. They are the insiders in society, in a society where religion and family was everything. The two most important institutions of the day, religion and family. The two groups of people who had the most control in the day, religion and family in that culture. They are the people right now rising up to try and take hold and take control of Jesus. They are the insiders worrying about what Jesus is doing to their institutions. One of the things that we must not get wrong, we get this too wrong, especially if you are white. Sorry to say this, but if you're white and you're kind of like brought up with certain viewpoints of life, we get this too wrong. We think that people are offended with Jesus because of his power. We think that people are offended because of Jesus' exercise of power, because he's doing good stuff. That's why we often think people are offended with Jesus. That is not what the gospel ever tells us. Why they are offended with Jesus is because he's doing good stuff to the wrong people. He's doing good stuff to the wrong group of people. The insiders are offended because the good stuff is for us, not for them. They're so used to the us and them conversations. They're so used to, this is for our group of people, the people who look like us, who are like us. This is for us. But the real reason why they're offended with Jesus is because he's doing good stuff for people who they don't want him to do good stuff for the lepers, for the Samaritans, for Roman centurions, for the poor, for the outcasts, for the people that society don't think are deserving of the kingdom. You see, the insiders are trying to control Jesus because he's opened the doors. And he's opened the doors to the wrong group of people. And they don't want any of this anymore. Jesus has invited all the insiders in. And this is creating a stir. The parable is about a house divided. It's about a divided house. What does Jesus say in the parable? Like, how can Satan be against Satan? How can a house be divided? If a house is divided, it will fall. How can Satan drive out Satan? Mark says, if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. He's just using basic logic here. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end has come. No one can enter a strong man's house and carry off his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man. Jesus is using the imagery of kingdom and home, contrasting the power of Satan with the strong man. What is Jesus essentially saying? He's saying this, that Satan isn't divided. Because if he were, this whole thing would fall apart. But what Jesus is really saying, what most of the theologians and commentators who write about this passage were saying, what Jesus is subtly saying, the thing that he's going to drive home even at the end, is this, that Jesus is the stronger man. There is one who has walked into the home, tied up the strong man, has thrown him out, and has thrown open the doors and invited people in. Jesus is saying, guess what? If you want to know what I'm doing, I am tying up the strong man. I've bound his arms. I've thrown him out, and the doors are wide open. I'm plundering the enemy's gates. I'm plundering his home, and I'm creating a new home where everyone can come in. You know what strikes me as remarkable about this passage? It's this verse. I find this the most remarkable verse. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him. It is funny. It's funny because you're like, imagine trying to take control of Jesus. Like, Jesus, I know you're Jesus, but, can you just obey me for a moment? I'm your mom. They've come to exercise control. They've come to put him in their place, as I've said. And the Pharisees are doing the same. Here's something that I think is really important for us to ask ourselves, is what is acting like a strong man in your life? You see, Jesus' family were acting like a strong man. They were trying to control him. They were trying to bind him up. They were trying to stop him from engaging in the work of God. The religious leaders were acting like a strong man. These institutional powers bedded in our society that act in a way to discredit the legitimacy of Christ and what God is doing is the strong men of society. That could be our culture, our religion, our family. It can be social media, different things that act like strongmen, that want to bind us up, hold us in, keep us tight, and stop us from being able to live out the call of God in our lives. In one sense, my own family, and I love my own family, so they know my story, and I respect my own family, but my own family at points have acted like strongmen, tried to use their pressure, their power, use their influence on me to try and get me to conform to a way that is not the way of Jesus. What in your life is trying to control you, trying to shape you, trying to bind up your own arms, trying to make your life impotent? Trying to express its influence on you? What are the insiders in your life trying to make you conform to its ways, or going to outcast you if you do not conform? We see this in some families. People convert, and what happens? They're outcasts. They get outcast from their own families. We can see this in culture. We can see this in society. We can see this on social media. If we try and express something that is the value of the kingdom, you can find yourselves being put out, a group that you previously found yourself in. These strong men acting in a way of gatekeepers, trying to determine who is in and who is out. I want to tell the quick story of a guy called Bayers Nordier. Some of you would have heard of a guy called Baz Nordier. Baz Nordier was a guy from the Western Cape. He was a Dutch Reformed minister from when he was ordained in 1939. He had joined the Boerbond, and he was a Dutch Reformed minister preaching the gospel of apartheid. As the government was about to change, as the British government was about to give over the reins of power to the apartheid governments at that time, Baz Nordier was exploring the scriptures. And as he was exploring the scriptures, he realized what he believed was utterly wrong. It was detestable in the eyes of Christ. And he began to write and oppose the Dutch Reformed Church that he was a part of, that he loved, that he longed to see reformed. But he wrote about how the gospel of Jesus is a gospel for all people, that the apartheid system was an evil regime. And you know what happened to Baz Nordier? The church acted like a strong man. It said, Baz Nordier, you are out of line. You are out of line with our teaching, with our way, with our culture. You are out of line, and they cast him out. The government told him he was out of line. He was essentially put under house arrest. Desmond Tutu was famously said about Baz Nordier that he became a leper to his own community for standing up for the ways of Jesus. You see, sometimes what happens is for us to follow Jesus means that we become an outcast in our own family, community, culture, society. You know what the real tragedy of me telling you the Baz Nordier story is? This is the real tragedy, and this is why this message is important for you. The real tragedy of the Baz Nordier story is not Baz Nordier. He's the story we know. The real tragedy of the Baz Nordier's story is the hundreds of thousands of people that believed what he said and could never change because of the strong men of family and society that gripped and took hold of them, and they just couldn't break free of it. Their stories are not told. Their names we do not know, but they are the tragedy that Jesus is trying to address. What Jesus does, and what this passage is essentially trying to tell us, is that Jesus is instituting a new reality, a new family. You know, in this passage, if you are not offended by this passage, theologians say, it is only because we live in the 21st century. But when you read this passage, you should be deeply, deeply offended by it. We should be radically offended by it. But we aren't, because we live in the 21st century. We live in a place where our children move away from home. I recently did a memorial for someone at an old age home in Hillary, and I was doing the memorial there, and I would say about 80% of the people who stayed in that old age home, as I chatted with them afterwards, all of their kids, about 80% of them, their kids lived overseas. Which means family is not what it is today. In that day, family was everything. Your dependence was on family. Your job was on family. You did what your father did. You know, when you hear of that, those things in the scriptures which says someone was Simon bar Jonah or something like that, it means Simon the son of Jonah. It was, you were named after your family. You did what your family did. You were expected to play your responsibility in family. Family was everything. So when Jesus says this, who is my mother? If that does not offend you, it's because we don't understand how deeply and how important family was in that day. This is meant to like rock your boat when you read this. It's meant to completely shake you up. You're meant to go, Jesus, what are you saying? Who is my mother? Who is my brother? As Jesus says. Jesus, what he's doing at that point as he brings it up is he's instituting a new institution, a new family. He's instituting a new insider place for all the outsiders. What's radical about this story, And why it's important to know that Jesus went to his home. Jesus went to his home is that when his family wants to come see him, they are standing on the outside. Did you recognize that in the story? Jesus outside, his family are outside, and they call someone in to go and call him. What's so important to understand is that Jesus is probably, most theologians will agree with this, Jesus is probably in his own home, which means he's in his family's home, which means it is their home to just walk into and go to. But they are outside because they are so offended by what is going on. They are standing on the outside, looking at Jesus and what he's doing, offended, throwing stones at him in one sense. They won't come in, that they order someone to call them out and to come and speak to them. You see, the insiders have cast Jesus out. But in casting Jesus out, they have become the new outsiders in one sense. Jesus identifies who the new group of people is. Who's my mother? Who's my brother? Can you not see? Those who are inside the house, those who are around. Anyone who does the will of the Father is my mother, my brother, and my sisters. 2 quick stories, and I'll tell you one last one and end. But 2 quick stories. Jesus is always inviting the outsider. Think of the woman at the well. When Jesus goes to the woman at the well in John chapter 4, he goes to the well at midday. Midday was not the hour that someone would go to collect, not the time. You would only go to collect water in the middle of the day in the scorching heat, going out by yourself. Collecting water was a community affair, which means if you were out in the middle of the day, in the middle of the intense heat of that area, if you were out there alone, it meant you were an outcast. It meant you were an outsider. And this woman's an outcast. She's an outsider. Why is she an outcast? Because essentially she's a man-eater. She's gone through so... Sorry if that's offensive. She's an outcast because of her situation. She's married 4 times. She's living with another person who is currently not her husband. Her lifestyle has found her excluded. The promiscuity of her life, the decisions of her life, the way that she's lived has found her in a place where she is an outcast in her own community. But who does she find in the outside? She finds Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He invites her to drink of living water. He invites her into grace and redemption. He invites her to come inside. The prodigal son's story. We know the story of the prodigal sons. It's a parable of the story of the one son who basically says to his dad, "Dad, I'm over you. You're as good as dead to me. Give me all your money. Give me my inheritance." And then what does he go and do? He goes and lives the good life. He lives the high life. He spends all his money. But then, as we know, a famine strikes the land. And as the recession and the famine hits him, his money dries up, and he finds himself in a really difficult position. He finds himself outside the family, outside of society. He finds himself as a no one, feeding the pigs. Now, if you were a Jew in that day, feeding the pigs is the lowest of the low job you could be doing. But he comes to his senses and he realizes, hey, my dad treats people better than I'm being treated. Let me go back, and even if I'm a slave, it will be better than the situation that I'm in. And he goes back to his father, and what does he find? He finds his father standing at the end of the road, looking towards the end of the road, waiting day after day that his son would come back, and his dad runs to him, which no dignified person in those days would do. They don't run, they wear those long kind of like man dresses, whatever you call them, which meant he would probably have to have picked it up. It would have been an undignified thing. He runs out, hugs his son, puts a cape on his son. What does he do? He brings the outsider in. But the story doesn't end there. The story ends with the older son, the insider, the one who belongs to the family, who when the celebration and the party has happened, what does it say? It says the older son is outside, offended, looking on, thinking, Father, why would you give away my wealth to this person who has squandered it. Jesus is telling the story of an outsider that gets welcomed in and an insider who finds himself outside. Can I give us 3 points? And then these will be quick. And then we'll end with a story I think that's really helpful. Number 1, here's a point for you to take away. Jesus is the stronger man. Jesus is the stronger man. I do not know what you are going through today. I do not know what problem you have. I do not know what you feel is holding you back or the things that are causing you to feel like you're an outsider in your life. I do not know what is oppressing you. I do not know what strong man you think is in your life that is keeping you bound. But what I do know is this, that Jesus is the stronger man. He is the one that walks into the enemy territory, binds up the strong man in your life, throws them out, plunders the enemy's resources, and welcomes you into his home. Today, whatever you're going through, Jesus is the stronger man. Second point is this, is that freedom is found inside the house. Freedom is found inside the house. Jesus institutes a new community. He institutes the church, a community which at its worst in history has sometimes acted, as we heard in the story of Bayes Nordier, as a strong man of oppression. But at the best, the church is like nothing the world has ever seen. Jesus has instituted a community of liberation, a community of freedom, and that freedom is found inside the house. It's found inside Christ. It's found where He is. And this is, my last point is this, it's a question, it's a point that may not make sense to you because we haven't gone through Mark, but it's an important point to understand because there's a point that Mark is always asking us. Mark asks us at the start, and he asks us at the end, and he asks it at every point. He's asking you and I to make a decision on where our allegiance lies. Are you going to side with the family and be outside? Or are you going to find your allegiance with Jesus? Can I make one quick comment just on the unforgivable sin, and then we'll land? Guys, I don't know what the unforgivable sin is. So, hello. I've read up a lot about it, and I'm pretty certain about this, that I think most of us don't know what it is. But I think one thing the scripture leaves us with this, is that everyone who comes to Jesus, no matter who they are, no matter what they've been through, no matter what sins they have committed, when they find themselves in Christ, find themselves forgiven. And anyone who for their own stubbornness decides to be outside of Jesus finds himself in a place where sin is not forgiven. Jesus is calling us in. And as he calls us in, he calls us into a forgiveness that knows no bounds. Can I tell you a story of a guy called James the Just? Don't know if you've heard of James the Just. James the Just is a figure in church history, and he was called James the Just because he was seen as being so ethical. I mean, how's that for a name? James the Just, you are so ethical. There was an uprising in Jerusalem, and uprising against the empire, and when the empire decided to come back and exert its force and exert its power and bring Jerusalem back into control, what happened in that exercise, what they ended up killing James the Just. He became a martyr. But he was such a good man in society, seen as so ethical, so just, that when he was killed, it wasn't only the church that mourned its death. We are told in church history that the society around him mourned his death because of how good a person he was. James the Just was one of the disciples who was part of the early church in Jerusalem. He was one of the disciples that when the church was scattered in Acts 8 after Stephen's stoning, that he stayed behind. James the Just was the disciple that we are told to believe became the head of the Jerusalem church that we read about in Acts 15. James the Just is also the author of the book of James, not James the disciple of Jesus, not one of the 12. James the Just was the author of the book of James. Here's the incredible part about James the Just. James the Just would have been standing outside of the house of Jesus in this story, because James the Just was the brother of Jesus. He was a family member, offended and outside, looking at Jesus, thinking he was out of his mind, trying to bring control and order. Now, I don't know at what point James the Just got a picture of Jesus for who he really was. But what we do know is that that outsider, that family member that took offense with Jesus, one day saw that his brother was the Lord of all, the King of kings, the creator of all that has been created, the Savior of the world. James the Just bowed his knee to Jesus and found himself, from being outside the home, coming in. If you ever wanted to know how we know that the gospel is authentic, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons should be James the Just. I don't know about you, but none of my brothers are worshiping me. And there's good reason for that. And I'm sure none of your siblings are worshiping you. They may think you're a nice person. They may tolerate you at Christmas. They may all of these other things. But James the Just gave his life, not because Jesus was his brother. He gave his life because he believed that Jesus was his Lord. I don't know if you are outside of the faith right now. Maybe you don't believe. Maybe you only kind of believe because you were brought up in a Christian family. This morning, Jesus is calling you not to stand on the outside, but to come in. I don't know if you find yourself wrestling right now this morning, wrestling with things and the institutional power that are trying to control you, trying to get you to conform to its ways, trying to be the strong man in your life. I don't know if you find yourselves not being able to live out the things that you believe, have the people that you want in your home, do the things that you believe you are called to because of the pressure of culture or society or family, or even just because of the pressure of social media. Jesus is inviting you to be free. He's inviting you inside the home. And if you're a kind of person this morning that has always struggled with the insiders and outsiders, you spend your days looking at those who are in and those who are out. Is that a Christian? Is that a Christian? They're not a real Christian. Should that person, I don't know if Jesus wants to save that person. Jesus is wanting to challenge you this morning. Challenge your view of the world. Because I'm pretty certain of this, that when we get to heaven, it's not going to be white, it's not going to be middle class, it's not going to be the group of people we think who is going to be there. Jesus is always bringing the outsider in. It is better to be an outsider that finds yourself in the house of Christ than an insider who finds yourself outside of home. Can I pray? Lord, we acknowledge you as the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. You are the Son of God, God himself, the one who willingly went to the cross, who hung on the cross with all your shame exposed to carry the sins of the world. We know you died, and 3 days later you rose again, glorious, magnificent, the conqueror of sin and death, the Lord of all, the one who sits at the right hand of the Father, the one who is seeing all his enemies be brought underneath your feet. Jesus, we worship you this morning. You're worthy of our praise. And even as we turn our eyes to you, Lord, I pray that you, as the stronger man, would break every hold on our lives, every comment from family, every pressure from our cultures, everything from society that is holding us back from living free and fully for you. I pray right now, Lord, that you would break those things and that you, by your amazing grace that is so sweet and glorious, grace that is so free and welcoming, a grace that is incomprehensible to us, that you, by your grace, you would invite us not to stand outside, but to come in, to sit at your feet, to hear your words, to live in your ways. And so, Jesus, I pray for anyone here this morning who finds themselves outside. Oh Lord, that by your Holy Spirit you would draw them in. That today we would be able to pledge our full allegiance, give our lives fully over, not to any country, but to you, Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Amen.